This is the Gary Plock Tennis Show. This is Gary, and I'm here with my brother, Ernie, and whoever else might call in on the phone so that we can talk a little bit about tennis. Today, I was going to talk about a tennis racket that I got in the mail. This is called the Tilden Top Flight, made by Spalding. A.G. Spalding was a baseball player in the 1800s, and he formed a sporting goods company and was one of the first athletes that became a big businessman in sports, and later bought the company Wright and Ditson. And here is a little photo of Bill Tilden, or drawing of Bill Tilden, who, of course, was one of the great players in the world for a time, was the best player. Ernie, you remember Bill Tilden, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were some who said back in the 1920s that Tilden was possibly an even more impactful athlete than Babe Ruth, which is saying something. But whatever the case, he was, along with the golfer Bobby Jones and Ruth and Ty Cobb, he was one of the great, and Dempsey in boxing, he was certainly one of the great athletic figures in the American landscape.
That's very interesting that you say that, because back in that day, tennis was a big deal and the crowds were very large, and he was one of those guys that was bigger in life, and you don't think of a tennis player being in the same realm as some of these baseball, basketball players today. But Tilden was also an innovator because, of course, he lost in the finals of the U.S. Nationals, which is now the U.S. Open, to little Bill Johnston, and people were incredulous that he would take 9 months off to practice just his backhand and not play the big tournaments and go abroad to Wimbledon. And I guess it panned out, because he won about 7 U.S. Nationals after that. And interesting in the book later on, because he was kind of outlawed by the U.S. tennis authorities, that he went over to Germany and became the Davis Cup coach there. Isn't that true?
That is correct. And that is really the prelude to that famous 1937 Davis Cup match between Gottfried von Cramm of Germany and Don Budge, that is considered by a good number of tennis people to have been the greatest match ever played. Of course, there's a relatively long list of sort of matches you might consider for that, but it certainly stands out.
What year was that?
1937.
So it's just when Hitler was getting going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had.
What happened in 37? Where was he about then? Hitler.
Well, 1937, it was, in terms of the foreign policy developments, it was the year after Hitler marched into the Rhineland, which was occupied by French troops after World War I. And one of the interesting things is, according to evidence, the French military then was more powerful than the German one in terms of conscription level and everything. And the thinking was that Hitler was doing something very dangerous as far as his own military was concerned, marching into the Rhineland. And there was even a plot to overthrow him if he marched into the Rhineland and was turned back by the French, who were felt to be superior. But the problem was, at that time, France didn't even have a government. It had fallen, and there was a lot of disunity in France at the moment. And Hitler prevailed, and so he wasn't overthrown.
So that was right around the time of this Davis Cup match, this famous Davis Cup match, which is chronicled beautifully in the book Terrible Splendor. And
exactly.
That match was actually at Wimbledon. Is that right?
That's right.
Yes, there's. I don't know if it's folklore or not, that that von Cramm actually took a call from Hitler in the locker room before the match, and that's kind of conjecture in the book whether that really happened or not. But von Cramm was an interesting guy. I want to point this out. You tennis players that play now, all these rackets are open throat now almost. See that happen? Everything cycles back around in tennis with the open throat, which was very unusual for the day, but they started doing that, and a lot of the players followed Tilden and started with this open throat with the thought in mind that it was more aerodynamic going through the air. And Tilden was the first to make that popular and actually use this racket, the Top Flight, to play with. Obviously no grips, leather grips on the handle, but a leather butt cap, which, as you see right here on the bottom. Okay, go ahead, Ernie. Can you tell us anything about that match?
Well, it was interesting to me that here you have a Davis Cup match, the semifinal round, whichever country won would play the British, and the British people felt that their boys would have a much better shot playing the German team than the American one. And that is one of the reasons why, I mean, again, the match was being played at Wimbledon on British soil. The crowd tended to be more pro-German, rooting more for von Cramm than for Budge, because Budge was really coming into his own as a player. And it was the next year that, of course, he won the Grand Slam in 1938. Plus the fact that the people that came to watch that match, the English population, a good number of them were kind of impressed with the Nazis, that the Nazis had sort of a gaudy, exotic, veneer. And to some extent also maybe racial feeling that the British and the Germans were both North Europeans.
Ernie, don't mean to interrupt you, but we have Michael Grant on the phone, a former top 100 player on the ATP tour back in the day.
Hello, Michael.
When I played. And so Ernie's just describing the Davis Cup at Wimbledon and the Budge von Cramm. Go ahead, Ernie. Michael, feel free to chime in if you should want to.
Yeah, so in addition to that, the fact that you had probably more of a pro von Cramm crowd there than a pro Budge one, was that von Cramm had really come into his own as a player. Like other Europeans, he was brought up playing on clay courts for the most part.
At the Rock Vice Club, among other places.
Very good.
Who are we talking about? Because it's hard for me to hear you guys.
We're talking about the Davis Cup match, Mike. I'll get Ernie to scoot around a little bit.
Yeah.
Davis Cup match at Wimbledon with Budge and von Cramm.
Okay. Yeah. That's a famous match that Budge pulled out. I think, wasn't he down 2 sets?
That is correct, Michael.
Good memory, even though it was before our time, guys.
And then the 5th set was very close.
Yeah, 8-6, or am I wrong?
I think that's right.
Right. Yeah, in fact.
Wow, good memory, Grant.
Von Cramm was up 4-1 in that 5th set, so it looked like the tide had turned back in his favor. Michael, you were much more skilled in tennis analysis than me, having played at such a high level. But I was just going to say that at that point, Budge changed his strategy rather dramatically and started coming in on von Cramm's serve, which was a real gamble because von Cramm had a great serve and he was constantly practicing it by himself. But it ultimately worked out for Budge, and he was able to get back into the match and win. Very gripping. Practically every point was a drama. From what I've read about the match.
Wasn't there a point where Von Cramm actually overruled a linesman on a call on a very important point, or maybe a break point.
I don't recall that, Gary. You know, I know that happened, and it's rather well known, but my memory vaguely thinks that was a doubles match somewhere else. But
Okay.
I can't be sure.
I think you're right. I think it might
Yeah.
have been a Davis Cup match instead, maybe with Allison Van Ryn.
So was that the final round that they played at Wimbledon instead of either here in the States or in Germany?
Well, Ernie was describing that earlier, where the way it was set up, it was like Wimbledon's all-comer tournament originally, where the British would play whoever came through the Davis Cup in the finals, and they chose to be at Wimbledon, of course, on British soil.
They used to. That was like the challenge round, which they did in the singles at Wimbledon, like in the very early.
That's right. Yeah, in the Doherty and Spencer Gore days. That's right.
That's right. So that's correct. So that was actually a semifinal to play England in the final.
Yeah, and
And
according.
And who was our second player?
I'm trying to remember.
Well, obviously Budge played with Mako in doubles, right?
Yeah, Gene Mako would have been his doubles partner. It
But-
could have
but
been
I don't know.
Ellsworth. It could have been Ellsworth Vines, perhaps.
I think
No,
it
I
was
don't think so. I think
maybe
Vines
Bunny
was
Austin.
early.
Bunny
No,
Austin
Vines
was English.
Vines was already a pro because he won Wimbledon in the U.S. in the earlier 30s. So I don't think he was. I think he was a professional by that year.
Well, let's see. Budge? Who else was playing with Budge at that time?
Well, maybe it was Mako playing, but I think they just played doubles together. Might be
I think
wrong.
that's right. I think Mako was playing doubles.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who that was. That's a good
Apparently,
question.
that's a little bit beyond my pay grade.
Well,
because I can't remember.
You guys chat about it a second, and I'll look it up because we're chronicling terrible splendor right now.
Okay.
By
All right.
Marshall
Yeah, I don't know.
Fisher.
Yeah, I wonder who it was. I mean, Riggs was a little too young because he came along like 39. It was actually Riggs only played in England one time in his life. You know, the year he won Wimbledon was the only time he played, and he won the singles, doubles, and mixed, and bet money on himself and won £100,000.
Yeah.
So you know that's an old story. Riggs bet on him. He was the fifth season singles, and he was. He bet on himself to win all three events that he did.
That's characteristic Bobby Riggs, isn't it?
Yeah, I met Budge once. He came to this exhibition that was played at Long Island University, CW Post, on an indoor court when the Bass system started, and Jimmy Van Allen was there. He was from around here, and they played 21 game, 5 serves each sets, and Santana came. Ash came, Passerelle came, Gravener came, and the women too. I bet Billie Jean King, Vicky Rogers, Stephanie Defina, and I can't remember who else. But Budge and Kramer were here watching, and I remember I got their autograph on a tennis ball and lost the tennis ball. So, that's my only experience with Don Budge. Probably saw him at the Open a few times.
Well, that's living history, Michael. That's I'm
yeah.
glad
Well,
you
he was
mentioned
he
that.
was a business partner of Sidney Wood, who was from around here, and they had a laundry business in Manhattan for many years. And then Budge retired not to California. He lived in the Poconos in Pennsylvania for many years, and had his tennis camp in Maryland. So he actually stayed in the East Coast after his playing days.
Yes, he did, but he would vacate. He would actually also go down to Florida and coach at a place called in Sebring, Florida, where they have the international races also. But Hardin
But
Hotel.
I mean, he was. I mean, I saw him at the Open every year. He was always here. But I mean, he was a businessman in the city, and then he retired to the Poconos and had his camp in Maryland. So I don't think he ever went back to California. He was from Northern Cal. He was Tom Stowe's, major disciple, and most of the teaching pros around here, modeled their teaching on Budge's strokes.
Yes, tell us about the tennis pro that you learned from that was a Tom Stowe disciple, because it took Michael
Yeah,
into
but
the
he
top
was a
100.
Bill Weisbuck was a Tom Stowe disciple once removed. He was working with Eleanor Tennant, who was really Tom Stowe's first disciple, who went to Southern California from Northern California, and Bill worked for her, and she, worked with Riggs and taught Alice Marble and
Maureen Conley was one of her biggest ones.
Yeah, right. She had like a whole slew of great American players from Southern California.
That was in San
period.
Diego. That was in San Diego.
L.A. and San Diego. I think she was in both areas at that time. Over those years. And Bill, ended up teaching from scratch, Budge Patty. That was his claim to fame, and Pauline Betts some. But mostly Budge Patty was his protege.
If you look at the Tom Stowe, one of his famous Budge backhands, if you're looking right now on this Tilden racket, you'll see how I've got my thumb on the very top and the hand wrapped around, and that's the way Budge learned, and several others to good players use that backhand.
I did too, but I didn't really do it that as well as they did.
Michael,
Bill taught that way as well, with the thumb diagonally up the back, and actually Mr. Savage, who I played with as a youngster, and Ham Richardson, and all the Americans of that era, they all did that because that was kind of the way you were supposed to hit a backhand.
Oh, did Ham Richardson do it too? I remember Savage.
Yeah. Well, Savage did, and I used to play with Ham Richardson on weekends when I was a teenager, and he lived in the city, and he did it, and I think a lot of Riggs did as well. I think a lot of the players of that era that was how to hit a backhand. Yeah. And my neighbor growing up, although a bit older, did it, was Dickie Stockton did it as well.
Oh, is that right? Did Dick do it as well?
Yeah, he put his thumb diagonally up the back. He had that old style backhand.
Michael, Ernie's got a trivia question about Steffi Graf for you. Go ahead, Ernie.
I won't know the modern stuff, but I'm really curious. Who was our second singles player in that Davis Cup final or semifinal?
We'll find that out before the end. But Ernie, go ahead and give him.
The singular trivia question.
Yes, it's
okay.
Old. He liked old. He said he remembers everything that was old.
Yes. I was asking Gary, just to put him on the spot, but I figure with a brother you can take such liberties. A woman by the name of Alsem, Aussem, and for the life of me, I can't remember her first name. I was asking Gary, what did Miss Alsem and Steffi Graf have in common?
I have no idea. I don't know who that other person is.
Silly.
Actually, her first name is Silly. Well, Celie Alsem was also a German woman who won Wimbledon. She won it in 1931. And what's also interesting is that she beat another German woman in the final, whose name was Krau, but for the life of me, I can't remember the rest of the name. That's what happens when you turn 70, I'm finding out. But anyway, I thought, I didn't know. I assumed maybe Steffi was the first German woman to win Wimbledon. But
I would have thought so too. But apparently you just came up with two old names I never heard of. So
well,
maybe because they were German, I didn't want to hear about them, especially in the 30s.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it is going back a bit, even for me. But a couple of the other facts that I found interesting about the von Cramm Budge match of 1937 was the coach of the German team, none other than Bill Tilden. And you think, my God, here you have Adolf Hitler in power, and he's going over to coach the German team. And there's a little bit of background for that as far as Tilden is
he probably
concerned.
needed the money.
Well, yeah, it always rears its unsightly head, doesn't it?
Well,
I'm sure he did it the money, but obviously a very anti-American thing to do.
Well, the U.S. Tennis Committee apparently rejected Tilden's plea to coach the American team. And you've got a lot of things going on there and understanding their rejection. Well, Tilden's gay lifestyle was becoming harder and harder for them to keep quiet about. And one supposes that was one of the motivations there. But also, Tilden
they said that possibly, I don't know if it's true or not, Von Cramm was gay.
Yes. In fact,
he was definitely gay. He would go to the bathhouses and
Oh, so maybe Tilden and he had some fun.
There's some conjecture about that. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm putting a graphic on here from the book Terrible Splendor, and over here we have Don Budge and Gene Mako, and then on this car we've got it'll answer your question partly. We've got Bitsy Grant, Frank Parker, and Don Budge, Wayne Sabin, and Gene Mako. So the 5 of them are on this car here. So I imagine that Frankie Parker, Bitsy Grant was probably at grass, not as talented. He was more of a clay courter. So I imagine that Frankie Parker would have been the other guy, unless Wayne.
But he was pretty young in 37. I mean, his years were in the 40s.
Yeah, that's true. But it could have been Mako and it could have been Sabin. We'll have to look that up.
I don't know about Wayne. Wayne Sabin, I think, was a teaching pro one time in the New York area as well.
I think he was.
Could it have been? This is just a conjecture. Could it have been a Bitsy Grant?
It could have been, but I don't think so. I mean, he actually was known for once beating Vines at Forest Hills on the grass.
Mm-hmm. We've been talking about Gottfried von Cramm. Here's a good look at him over here. And he was known as a real sharp dresser, and every hair's in place there, and was very much a sportsman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was telling Gary, I'm sorry.
No, I say he kind of had like a Federer-like appeal to the public.
Yeah, I was telling Gary that one thing I found remarkable about von Cramm is, like you were saying, a rather immaculate nobleman, very charming old world manner. But by the 30s, when von Cramm was playing the French Open, which at the time was considered the second most prestigious tournament after Wimbledon, but at the French Open, von Cramm managed to win over the French crowd in his match against Fred Perry, which I think you think that was only 14 years after that horrible bloodbath of World War I, and here you have a German being able to, catch the fancy of a French crowd. I thought, well, I guess that's an example where national animosities were subordinated for the moment, and they realized what a rare individual von Cramm was.
Well, but the French are fickle anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're not consistent like us Yanks, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
But bunch of wussies.
Well, I'm not going to touch that one, Michael. But anyway, another interesting thing about von Cramm is it reminded me a little bit of Bjorn Borg, who was thought of as a clay court player, but managed to alter his game enough to win 5 Wimbledons in a row. Von Cramm was also brought up on clay, and he knew if he were to make the impact of all impacts and win Wimbledon, he would have to change his game in a couple fundamental ways. And I would defer to you two, much better tennis players than me, to chime in on this. But for one thing, grass basically necessitates a shorter backswing. You don't have as much time to rear back and hit the full ground stroke. Also, von Cramm had a wonderful topspin serve, which on clay could be deadly, but that was, as I understand it, neutralized on grass where it wasn't as an
True.
effective.
True.
So Van Cramm went about altering his game, both the serve and the shorter backswing, which he wasn't used to, but being the great player he was, he made the adaptation. That's all.
Yeah, I think he's one of the, like Lendl, and Rosewall, one of the greatest players in the game that didn't win Wimbledon.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So Van Cramm never won Wimbledon. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Michael, what's happening up in New York City? Is there any good tennis other than the U.S. Open happening?
No, that's about all the action. We used to have this wintertime ATP event locally right here on Long Island, but I don't think they're doing it anymore. So,
what are your memories of playing in the U.S. Open? You first ball boyed in the U.S. Open, right?
Yeah, and probably, and I went when it was at Forest Hills pretty much every day when I was a kid. So from pretty much '68 on, and my memories playing was my couple of singles rounds I played in 1980 and all the way in the back field courts, which have been reconfigured since then. So I don't even think the courts I played on, they might be selling, soda where I played. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Who did you play in your first U.S. Open match?
Ricardo Icaza from Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
I beat him in the first round.
I remember seeing him at IMG down here at a junior tournament just a couple of months ago, and he's been teaching there at IMG for about 15 years now. I have not seen him.
Mention my name. That should upset him.
Well, I remember. It might upset him because I remember telling him. I said, the first time I ever played John McEnroe was in his backyard when they were dumping the clay on Forest Hills, and they had all of the qualifyings out on Long Island, out by where you lived, and I played McEnroe the day that McEnroe had lost to Ricardo Icaza at Shelter Rock in the junior tournament, and the same day went and beat me in the second round of the qualifyings. And then Zan Gary took him out, I think, in the next round, but if I got the years right. But Ricardo Icaza, that's a really good win because he was an Ecuadorian that had a huge forehand. And both of you.
Yeah, I beat him in straight sets, and then I lost in 5 to Terry Toulon from France, which I came back after losing the first 2 and then lost a close 5th setter. But he was actually came on strong that year. That year he beat Vitas at the Italian and whatever. He was pretty hot.
Toulon was a good player.
I could have won the match, but and then he lost to Lendl, who I had also played that summer and did about as well as he did, which wasn't very good. But
I just say, Gary, I'd like to probe you a little bit on the Zan Gary defeat of McEnroe subsequent to your playing him, because was that the match where McEnroe had match point and there was some dispute about a call?
Yes.
And
that was bad.
McEnroe, rather than packing his bags and saying, well, no, I won the match, he stayed around, and Gary insisted that they replay, and Gary won the point and then went on to win the match.
That's true. That's true story. That was it. The Glen Head, was it Glen Head Country Club, Mike, or Glen Head Racket Club? I think it was a country club.
I think it was. I don't remember. It was either. There's 2 clubs right there. There was Glen Cove, but Glen. I think it was outdoors. It was a Glen Head Country Club.
Well, after that, John McEnroe plainly learned that you go ahead and take your rackets and leave the court. Don't stick around in that situation.
Yeah. Well, it kind of got known that Zan Gary didn't give him a good call or something. So.
Interesting. Well, this wraps up the Gary Plock Tennis Show for today. I want to thank Ernie and want to thank Michael for coming on, and
enjoyed doing it.
We enjoyed it, and we will surely do it again soon, maybe real soon. Michael, thanks for chiming in.
Good
Okay.
talking with you,
Good to
Michael.
talk to you, boys.
Yeah.
All right. See you, Michael. And thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, that worked out.